May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our hope. Amen. Bet you wish I'd read those the other way around, because it sure sounds like the first part is the hope part. That piece from Matthew comes at the end of a very long, well, the majority of that chapter, in fact, a very long passage of Jesus talking about how the end is near and there's going to be death and destruction and horrible things are going to happen, and a sign of the impending apocalypse is that the Maple Leafs will win the Stanley Cup, and terrible things will happen. And then he says, but no one knows when, so be ready. Be awake. Oh, everyone's still awake. Okay, good. Isaiah, if you read through all of the book of Isaiah, it's so interesting how Isaiah manages to talk about how the end is near and horrible things are going to happen and terrible things and judgment and all this horrible stuff, and then says the most wonderful, uplifting, hope-filled things about how there will be peace and we will all live together on God's mountain, and wonderful things are and the Messiah is coming. This is one of the reasons why we like Isaiah so much, right? Is how often Isaiah, later through Isaiah, he talks about the coming of the Messiah. Make straight in the desert a highway, God is coming. Comfort my people, comfort ye, you, ye. I always have to say ye because it's from Messiah. But we have these wonderful words of hope and comfort. And then Jesus says these really dark things and simply says, be ready. Where's the hope part, Jesus? Because, we kind of live in a world where we're experiencing a lot of that stuff you're talking about, and we'd really like to hear some words of hope. Thank you very much. So where are they? Where is the hope? I think Jesus would say, it's in you. Because the reason that he talks about you should be awake and be prepared and be ready for all this stuff's going to happen isn't because you need to be ready for that. It's because that's a sign of something. And we go, yes, it's a sign of the end. That's what apocalypse means, right? Destruction and death and, Revelation, that's what it's all about. It's about the end of things. That actually isn't what the word apocalypse means. Apocalypse means a revealing. And what's being revealed isn't death and destruction and the end of things. What's being revealed is the beginning. Because beginnings don't happen without an end, do they? And we tie ourselves to that end of the world stuff really easily. That may be because we do tend to see particularly people who are very, religious in a very sort of evangelical tradition kind of way. People do tend to see fire and brimstone, right? Judgment is coming, and as long as you're on the right side of the judgment, that's great. Except we're all on the right side of judgment because God loves everyone. But we tend to tie ourselves into that idea that how you live your life, according to the teachings of Jesus, of course, but how you live your life is about where you're going next. And it ain't. I'm sorry, that was very bad grammar for any of the school teachers, but that's kind of the point. That's still okay. It isn't about where we're going next. How you live this life is about this life. That's why Jesus keeps talking about the most hopeful thing ever. The kingdom is near, because it's in you. There's your hope right there. The kingdom is near, or even here. We have this idea that if we live the way Jesus teaches, that'll get us into heaven. And that's a great thing, except you're going there anyway. But it isn't about that. The reason Jesus teaches what he does, and he teaches that by living it, is to teach us how to live, not die. All of this stuff about the end times and everything, what's being revealed there is eventually stuff's going to happen, but there'll be a new beginning. There's a new beginning every day. This metaphor for you: the darkness of night, the light of the dawn is the beginning of a new day. It doesn't mean the darkness is bad. It's a rest time. Or is it? Because stuff comes out of the darkness, doesn't it? We are so quick to twist things like that. I don't know whether we're entertained by it or whether we actually think it's true. But we're so quick to rush to that. Even the idea that the book of Revelation, the four horsemen, all of that stuff is about the end of things. And that's the piece that you want to focus. You don't focus on that piece. You focus on the piece where the New Jerusalem comes from that. Life comes from the end. And the point of Jesus is to teach you to live life into this world. Hope is that the kingdom is near, because it is. It is in you to live that goodness into the world. I had an interesting comment this week from somebody that I have to say I'd not had before, and I don't know if it's entirely true, because I talk about this every year. Because at some point in Advent, there's a story about Jesus says he's coming back. Right? The second coming. Jesus mentions that he intends to, the Son of Man will return. We've built there's whole religious stuff built around that and everything. But he does say that. And this week, I mentioned that in my midweek video, that the idea of Christmas isn't just about the Christmas of the distant past, that we are commemorating that event, nor is it about the traditions of Christmas we've built since, or indeed about this Christmas. It's also about the Christmas that is promised, because Jesus said he'd be back. And this week, somebody said to me, it's interesting that you mentioned the second coming, because United Church ministers don't tend to talk about that a lot. I did not know that. You can see why, given where it's been taken by other religious people, but you can see why we wouldn't want to focus on that. But the thing is, Jesus talks about it, so we should probably mention it. And the thing is, I think where it's been taken is why we don't want to talk about it. Where it's been taken is Jesus will come in great power and glory, and he'll do this thing where you good people go here and the bad people go there, and some of you are going to the fiery pit and all of that stuff. That's not what he says, though. He says stuff's going to happen, sure. But then the Son of Man will return. And see, I don't think that we're like those people in the first century who heard Jesus say that and then kept looking at the calendar waiting for him to come back. Because that is what happened. Jesus said he'd be back, and so the first followers of Jesus expectantly waited for Jesus to return next week, month, year, at some point. I'm sure in my lifetime. Until Paul started to talk about how maybe Jesus didn't mean it that way. Maybe Jesus meant in the distant future, generations from now. Which is a great idea, because that meant people that stopped expecting Jesus next week and instead focused on the idea that you need to be prepared because you don't know when. Okay, great. The thing is, I believe the point of Jesus is indeed to show us that the divine spirit is in all of us. It's connected to our earthiness because, as I always say, the creation story says we are created both of the divine spirit of God and of the earth. And Jesus is trying to show us how to reconnect with that divine spirit come back to God, and live that goodness that is in us into the world. So, I don't think Jesus ever left. I think you can meet Jesus just by turning to your left or right and looking at the person next to you. I think you can meet Jesus going around a corner. I think you can meet Jesus on the street. I think you can meet Jesus anywhere that you encounter another person. The being prepared part isn't about being prepared to see the end times and Jesus coming in clouds of glory. The being prepared part is, are you open to the idea that Jesus is alive in each of us? Are you prepared to meet Jesus in the person you least expect Jesus to appear in? Because that's where Jesus is. So for us to experience Jesus to return, we simply need to be open to seeing Jesus in anyone we meet. Could be a baby. Could be somebody we run into on the street. Could be somebody who runs over us on the street. It could be somebody we don't like. It could be somebody whose ideas or theology we don't like. It could be somebody who we perceive as being cruel and heartless. I'm not going to talk about governments, it's okay. It might be that we are open to seeing Jesus in just anybody. Are you? Because that's one of the things that I think we're not. And I think that's one of the great things about Advent, is that it prepares you not just for Christmas, the big party we're all going to have, remembering, of course, that not everyone is happy about Christmas or happy at Christmas. It's about preparing us to meet Jesus. And so as you're bustling around doing shopping and stuff, and you bump into somebody who just grabbed that last toy that you needed to buy, that's Jesus too. As you are bustling around doing Christmas baking or making gifts or wrapping gifts, and you accidentally stick your pair of scissors through the gift, and you want to be really mad at yourself, you're Jesus too. We can meet Jesus in any moment, is the point. So this isn't asking you to be prepared for some great future in which Jesus appears in clouds of glory. It's asking you to be prepared for the fact that Jesus is right here. And we meet Jesus in any circumstance. Are you ready for that? Because I think that's the great hope. We look around at the world and how horrible things can be in different places in the world, how things are going in the world, and we look at that and we go, well, look at the world, Jesus. Look at how bad things are. And isn't that we just despair of how things are going. But hang on. Look where you are. Look around where you are. Not just in your community, maybe where you live, your neighbors, in your own home. Look for Jesus. Because it isn't about fixing the great, Jesus never intended to fix the world. He started out by trying to help individuals. Okay, he fed 5,000 people and he did heal 9 lepers, so that's a group. But still, most of the time, Jesus was interested in individuals. Anybody that felt like they were marginalized or cut off from things. Anybody who needed healing. He picked 12 ordinary people to be his first disciples. Ordinary people. When we tell the Christmas story, when we talk about the shepherds and the magi and Mary and Joseph and the angel, and we talk all of these special people, but they weren't. They were ordinary people, just like you and me. And that's where Jesus is. And that's the greatest hope of all, the certainty that we can meet Jesus just by turning to the person next to you.